so we can record the meeting. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can just kind of jump into it. So, Kathy, just for your reference, the past couple of meetings, we basically, the two people who are providing the notes kind of go over what they have put together. We have any discussion as a group and kind of discuss how we want to move forward with the writer and how they want to coordinate with whoever is doing edits, and then we'll figure out a good next one for our next meeting. So, just to refresh everyone's memory, this week's group assignment was in regards to outlining an employee handbook. So she was looking for us to put together an employee handbook for our specific organization and to describe policies, procedures, laws, work rules, etc., that you feel are important for employees to know and why. So Lacey, I'll just start with my notes and then I'll pull up yours that you sent over to me and then kind of let you walk through them if that works.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So the two links that our professor provided in the overview I thought were extremely helpful. One of them was basically like a sample employee handbook that kind of outlined what you would typically find in an employee handbook, like what are those kind of overarching topics. And then also, I think it was like chapter 9 in our book that I read through that had some good input as well. So I know that we haven't received our grade back for our week 2 assignment, but something that our professor mentioned on our week 1 was that she could really hear different voices throughout the paper. So I tried to keep this kind of more generic and bullet pointed with a couple sentences here and there, just so it allows you, Kathy, to like really have your voice come through since you'll be writing the paper this week. So from the sample employee handbook kind of overview, they said what is included in an employee handbook. So typically you would find your company's mission, vision, and overview of its culture. So kind of what we provided last week. Guidelines to employee conduct, details on legal aspects, summaries of perks and benefits, and description of company processes. So I kind of took those overarching ones and just broke them down into different groupings. So obviously working at a hospital, confidentiality and data protection are both going to be really important keys that need to be included in an employee handbook. I work for a healthcare IT company, so that's something that's obviously really stressed to us on a daily basis, making sure that our data isn't getting breached and that we're taking the appropriate measures to kind of keep that information private, keep patient data private, etc. So this kind of paragraph I pulled from that website, basically saying making sure that no client, employee, partner, or company data is breached. Examples of this would be records, financial information, data, unpublished goals or initiatives getting released out to the public or someone outside of whoever hands that is supposed to be in. So, typically if you're dealing with data, a hospital or company may ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We had to do that for my company when we signed on. And so basically just kind of monitoring what you're doing on your computer, what you're doing on your, oh my God, I'm sorry. What you're doing on your computer, providing trainings for the employees so they know how to handle the data, making sure that we have secure networks, something that's, oh, stop it. Really sorry.
He's vocal.
He's a husky, so he has a lot.
Oh, nice.
Oh my God, relax. Nope. Something that is really stressed to us, for example, today I work from home. I'm not allowed to get on any employee websites without connecting to a VPN to make sure that all of that information is secured and that they wouldn't allow for any data.
Right, yeah.
Oh, I'm really sorry, guys. Okay, so kind of do's and don'ts that I outlined just based off my own personal experience. Making sure you always lock your computer screen whenever you aren't using it. Making sure you're shredding confidential documents or putting them in the appropriate confidential document buckets. Making sure you're not breaking HIPAA violations by sharing patient data. Only disclosing patient information to other employees who are actually part of the patient's treatment. So sorry, guys. And keeping those confidential documents in assigned areas. So then obviously don't use that confidential information for better profit. Make sure you're, holy crap. Okay, I'm gonna pause for like 2 minutes. Short background, my dog was in a car accident, so he can't go outside without me putting the brace thing on him. And he really wants to go outside, which is why he's howling so much. So I'm really sorry. Can you guys give me like 2 minutes?
You're fine.
You can just read over the screen while I do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Sherry, if you wanted to switch it to mine, I could do mine in the meantime.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Let me just pull yours up. Can you see it, Lacey? Okay.
So you guys already shared your documents with each other?
She just sent it to me right before this meeting so that I could screen share it for everyone to see. So, Lacey, I don't know if you want to talk through yours right now.
So Carrie and I have different medical backgrounds, so it's kind of a cool thing this week because there's multiple perspectives in this one.
Right.
She's going through obviously more of, she works for Cerner, so she does a lot of, similar to like eclipses, things like that. So a lot of the hospital charting, but because I've actually worked in a New Orleans trauma center, I kind of take things a little bit, I guess, different. So whenever I wrote this, I kind of did it from my firsthand experience. I did think one reference in here, which is one that she sent to us, but I did the same thing. I didn't actually put it into any kind of form of actual sentences, but just bullet points, just because I know that it needs to be one voice, and I know that first week she said it needed to be more like one voice, and we didn't accomplish that quite right. So this first bullet set I actually just took from this link on the Nacho website, and that's just literally what it says exactly. So that's just basic HR work, confidentiality, which she already touched on, but I went through more things, and we may not go quite low enough on this page, but our thing, and all the hospitals that I've ever worked at, and I actually work at one of the top 5 in the whole country, we actually have binders of the policies and procedures within every department. And if it's not within a department, it's at least within the firewall zones. So that way, if there's any question of any sort, I mean, there's always one in reach. So that, I mean, that plus we actually have it on the employee's website. So that way you can see, no matter where you are, even if you're at home, if you have a question about anything that's a policy, it's in the reach of any employee. The next thing we talked about was no tolerance. This was on their website, but that is, unfortunately, it's super common in the trauma room because, well, one, they're traumatized, but you don't know how people are going to react to the drug, how they react to the adrenaline, all of those things. And with your adrenaline, you don't really know how your coworkers are going to react. So this is very, very important in the workforce because it's also a very confined space in your workforce. So if I have to squeeze around somebody, there is a lot of people touching one another, and it kind of can just become very claustrophobic if you're not aware of all the rules. So I wanted to make sure that it did get noted that as a healthcare provider, you do have the right to refuse patients. I know that that sounds horrible, but you can, and there is a reason for it, and that's in, for the most part, every handbook that I could find. And I know that Carrie already mentioned some of this other stuff, so I'll just kind of briefly go over it. Confidentiality, employees and patients alike, HIPAA violations. I know she mentioned the bins, but same thing in the actual trauma center. You can't go to the elevator or the stairs or the cafeteria, and you can't be, speaking of it. I went over qualifications and the verifications just because I have worked in Louisiana. I do know that the medical board actually physically checks, and they don't actually just put it through the system, but they actually contact the individual. So whenever I worked at Charity Trauma Center in New Orleans during Katrina, they actually contacted me to make sure that it was appropriate that they were checking on me. So if you apply to any medical board, medical center in Louisiana, that's going to happen. So it's actually like a two-step. Let's see. They do a lot of retention services, and I know that that's not just New Orleans, Louisiana, but I think everywhere in the big hospitals, they do retention activities. Excuse me. They have different committees that'll probably wherever you guys work too. They just have different committees, and so I think normally they're called something happy, sunshine, or whatever. It's just a committee that will get everybody out for bowling or whatever to grow the bond a little bit. And that way, whenever you are in a high risk scenario, like a chemical spill or a fire or a car pile up or heaven forbid a hurricane, things like that, because things do get very close. And so these retention activities actually help with the harassment stuff, and they kind of actually go a little bit hand in hand because you create a bond and a trust with the people that you work with. Recruitment of qualified individuals and the reflection of the population. I think that one kind of speaks for itself, but most trauma centers and or hospitals are all hiring, everybody. That way nobody is left out, and that way everybody is also culturally competent. Let's see. And then I went on about individual positions, because a lot of times whenever we think of hospitals, we think of nurses, doctors, but there are so many other positions in the hospital. Like Carrie does the background work for Cerna, Cerner, excuse me. That's massive. If you have big risk cases, you're going to have news there all the time. So you also have social media specialists. You have different people that care for different things. And so I just kind of wanted to know that things like environmental services and people that do the finances are also being hired into this kind of facility, not just medical professionals. Quality improvement. This is so strange because it's so old whenever you do it every single year. But these things, they make a serious difference. They go through, I know we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but just, I don't know, Kathy, I don't know if you listened to the meetings or not, but we kind of talked about the different kinds of codes that there are. And if you're doing these, like some of these you may never see. I've done it for 12 years now, and I've actually seen, for the most part, all of them except for one. And without these drills, if it does happen, people aren't going to be able to handle it in most cases. So this is super important to me. I kind of touched a little bit on the health equity and the culturally competent workforce. This is also important, especially in today's world. It is important because whenever like I've been doing the NICU for a long time now, and I do a lot of high-risk deliveries. So if I have a high-risk delivery, then it's obviously going to be a dangerous delivery. We're not sure if the baby's going to come out alive or not, and how much resuscitation it will need. If you have a mother in labor and you don't have anybody that speaks her language, that's not okay for the parent or for the mother, because it's going to create a stress level and make her blood pressure go up, and there's a whole slew of things that comes with that. So that's just one example, but it's a really awful thing to have a facility that's not culturally competent. After that, for the most part, I went through kind of that second handout that she gave us, and I just kind of listed out some compensation stuff and benefits, all the good stuff that we always want to know. Basically your pay, how much time you get off, all that good stuff, just because I know that they are in all the handbooks, but I didn't really have anything particularly that I thought exactly tied to us in general. For the importance of it, I basically overstated some of the details that I just gave you. It's really important that healthcare providers in general know that they are allowed to refuse patients because of harassment, and that they won't be retaliated against. And I think that is important to note in a handbook for any kind of healthcare facility. Knowing that they're backed by their own company, it's really important. I think that's about it. I just referenced the one where I put the bullet points, just so that it was noted that I took those word for word. And then I just kind of wrote on it.
So your code of conduct within HR are quotes, the whole thing.
Yes, the bullets themselves, yes, she's highlighting them. The bullets are actual quotes. Like, that is what I took from the Nacho website for code of conduct. So I didn't want that to be quoted because that's an actual quote. That's why I put the reference in there. Everything else was not referenced.
In the future, can you put quotes around the whole thing so that I know that? Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lacey, for breaking it down. I will go ahead and flip back over to mine. So definitely similarities between the two in terms of, what we think needs to be covered. And so I'll just get into that below. So I went over kind of confidentiality and data protection. Next thing is around harassment. So as you mentioned, I also pulled in harassment, regardless if it's sexual, verbal, or physical. It's unacceptable in our organization. Below, these should actually have quotes around them. Thank you for the reminder, Kathy. These were specific examples that came from this sample employee handbook, one of the websites that our professor provided. And I basically just went into description about, how it's a really important thing to be touched on, and it's something that is taken extremely seriously. You know, if it's an employee or a colleague or a patient, regardless of who it is, it needs to be reported to somebody. If the offender is found guilty, you know, we may take legal actions, and then also provided some additional information about, you know, making sure to contact both your manager and HR if you're ever in one of those type of situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like the self-reporting kind of aspect of it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then that also kind of ties directly into this lower part, workplace safety and health. These were kind of went hand in hand on the sample employee handbook website, but it's essentially just breaking down the same thing. Here we're talking about, I mean, sexual assault, sexual harassment, those go hand in hand, but destruction of property, threats, whether it's verbal or psychological abuse, just avoiding all of that together. Once again, I kind of just put like a brief sentence indicating, you know, to please report this violence to your manager and HR. It'll be kept confidential so that the person who's reporting doesn't get in trouble. You know, or if you're witnessing some type of physical violence or feel unsafe, you know, make sure to contact security. Most hospitals have a couple security officers, excuse me, on site. So just kind of noting that in any of these situations, you can always call one of our security officers, and they will, you know, come and help.
Mm-hmm.
And then just some other things. So emergency management, this was something that Lacey touched on too. Any type of natural disasters, or, you know, active shooters, explosions, making sure that in our employee handbook, we indicate, you know, what we have on site to support our employees, how to handle that situation, and where that information can be found. So in my old position at Cerner, I actually used to go travel to the States and train doctors in every area of hospitals and outpatient clinics on our different EMR solutions. And something that was always brought to our attention is that at each nursing station or at each like fire escape area, there was always some type of floor plan, fire escape outline, booklet that contains what to do in this type of a situation. So making sure that we indicate that in an employee handbook. Some other standard ones, you know, most hospitals are smoke-free, drug-free, and alcohol-free areas. So making sure, you know, we just touch on that as well. Code of conduct, so dress code, obviously that's kind of an important one, not like vital because most people in hospitals are wearing scrubs, but more for the administrative side, you know, they'll have a dress code. Can go into conflicts of interest, employee relationships, rules about specific visitors, etc. Obviously, kind of as Lacey mentioned, I kind of made these ones shorter because I feel like they're pretty self-explanatory. Compensation and development, everyone wants to know about overtime, if they're a salary or non-salary employee, payroll, when they're going to get paid, what type of training is required, those types of things. Obviously, our benefits, so our healthcare, workers' compensation, maternity, paternity leave, any type of employee expenses or issued devices, working hours, PTO, and vacation. So, you know, what is your weekly accrual rate for PTO? What are your holidays that you get off? If you are an hourly employee, it's obviously a hospital, and hospitals don't shut down. So what happens if you do have to work a holiday, excuse me. Do you get paid overtime during that? Do you get an extra day off a week later? What are those rules? Employee resignation and termination. So obviously kind of breaking down, if you're going to resign, you need to give a 2 weeks notice. Or if you get fired, if you have any type of company devices, how long do you have for those items to be returned, or can anything be kept? I don't know in hospitals if you typically get on the clinical side if you get distributed computers, but I know on the administrative side of hospitals you typically get distributed like computers and things like that. Something from the Nacho website that I thought was interesting was they had a breakdown and said that typically you would have a health department org chart. And I thought that was interesting. I think that may be hard to do in the employee handbook of the entire organization, because they kind of broke it down and said that, you want to show leadership, upper management position, and orgs. But maybe something that would be done kind of at the department level. So if there was a surgery department or a cardiology department, or the ED, kind of having separate org charts in there. Provisions of training and staff laws. So this one I did take directly from that Nacho website. So this kind of goes hand in hand with what Lacey was referring to in regards to specific laws and trainings that we have to abide by and be in compliance with. And then I think I actually wrote conflict of interest twice, but conflict of interest, so, making sure employees know that they have the right to engage in other businesses, but, as long as it's not interfering with their duties, or they're not, I know specifically for Cerner, we had to sign some type of an agreement to say that we can go work for one of our competitor companies. Not sure if that's the same with hospitals, but things along those lines. And then obviously any type of required annual trainings that need to be done, health and safety, disaster, diversity, community, etc. So I put 3 sources in. I used the conflict of interest and required trainings. There's a lot of information about that in chapter 9 in our book. And then I also use that Nacho website as well as that sample employee handbook template. And break those down.
Yeah, sounds like you guys got a lot of information, which is awesome. If anything, it'll be difficult to because it's only supposed to be is it only up to 3 pages?
Yeah. So
if anything, it'll be difficult to try to condense it all. But I'd rather have more information than less. You know what I mean? So.
Mm-hmm. So I guess Kathy and Adam, what type? Do you guys have specific questions, or was there anything that stuck out to you between mine and Lacey's notes where you were like, yeah, I definitely think we should include that in our employee handbook, or, maybe that, we could touch on this really briefly, but it may not be super necessary to go into depth about. I'll kind of pull them both up here.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to group things. So because of being limited, but try not to omit too much. But not overwhelm it either.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a balance. Because while you guys were doing yours, I already kind of grouped them into similar categories, because your guys, Your guys's are very specific topics in detail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Pardon?
I think that's a great idea. I think that'll do it very well.
Okay.
Yeah, and like obviously there's a lot going on in both of ours, so
Right.
feel free. Like I think grouping them together and kind of doing more of a high level. I think we just both wanted to. Well, I don't want to speak for you, Lacey. I wanted to kind of break down specific areas. Like you can obviously see the confidentiality and data protection. That's something that I deal with on a daily basis. So the notes I provided on that section were a lot more lengthy than other areas where I provided information. So
yeah, and then I also want to make sure that because we chose to emphasize a tiny bit on trauma, I want to make sure that we stick something in there about the trauma. For instance, like when to activate the level 1 or whatever. Something like that I think would be to make ours a little personal.
I don't know exactly which point of it was, but
Right.
you could wrap that in whenever I kind of talk about, I think I put it in the importance, but whenever you talk about the different code names of different emergencies, that's kind of where that comes up. So there is a place in mind that would go pretty well. I don't have mine grouped as well as she does, so give me a second and let me find it. Quality improvement. Quality improvement, annual staff trainings, and competencies. This includes chart auditing, hand washing audits, code drills, and emergency preparedness drills. It would fit kind of well in that because a lot of times whenever you're activating different levels of trauma, like in the hospital, they don't actually say what level it is that's coming in, but you'll know what it is that's coming in. So they may come over the head speaker and say code trauma, which means everybody that's on the code team or the trauma team needs to run to either the trauma room or wherever the issue is, typically obviously the trauma room, but it could be anywhere. So that might be something to kind of put in there, is with the trainings and the quality improvement and all the competencies, because those are done as drills as well.
Oh yeah, I've worked in a hospital.
Yeah, so I think it would be a good place to put it.
Absolutely. So it looks like we have 4 minutes left for the actual recording portion because I used the free version of Zoom. Are there any other questions that you have, or obviously I'll post the recording, Kathy, and then Lacey and I can both post our notes on the discussion board so that you'll have access to this when you write the paper. I actually will be leaving town and won't have access to my computer at all until like Sunday afternoon. I don't really think it's necessary to have another call this week unless something comes up, Kathy, and you wanted to touch base with everyone. But I think we're pretty good at utilizing the discussion board, going back and forth. So with that being said, for next week, what day would everyone be available next week to have a call? I know, Kathy, you said Thursdays don't work. Is this a good time, or Wednesday's a good day?
Well, I just had to get into the routine because what had happened is so I'm on duty from 10 until 8:30 at night, but I usually had time to be able to take away to work on specifically items on my school that were important because I could do flex time. But the last couple of weeks is the new quarter started, and we had doubled to quadrupled the amount of students, which intensified my level of work, which got in the way of my school. And I'm sorry.
No, that's totally okay. We want to make sure that, obviously we're setting up times that work.
Yeah. Now it's more, now that things have settled down, I just need to know ahead of time what works for you guys. But Thursdays are really not a very good day but any other day.
Okay.
Friday, but this next 2 weeks is at the end of the week. Thursdays and Fridays aren't a good time because I have a new thing because I also do internships at a hospital, so we're training a new team on Fridays.
Gotcha.
So
how about if we kind of keep Wednesday as our meeting days at this time?
That sounds good.
Works, because then it'll give the note takers each week 2 days to prepare their notes, and then it gives the person who's writing the paper obviously 4 days to kind of put together their portion, and then they can hand it off to the editor.
So I think it's good to have the paper done for everyone to view on Saturday. Do you guys agree with that? So everybody can, the draft to everybody, I would say later in early afternoon on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Saturday evening, I'm going out of town too, but just Saturday evening, I probably won't be available because I'll be back in Oklahoma. But I mean, I'm editing it, so as far as how much the edits really need, it just kind of depends. But yeah, I'm up to try to have it done by Saturday.
Yeah, I think that could be a good target moving forward. Obviously, with people's schedules, some weeks may not be able to get it done by then, but we'll just